Years ago, H.G. Wells visualized roads such as these in his science fiction fantasies. And today they're a reality.
You're listening to The Afternoon Commute. John Adams. And Chris Kendall.
Welcome to The Afternoon Commute with Chris Kendall and John Adams. Today is October 26th, 2016. If you'd like to hear previous episodes of The Afternoon Commute, you can go to hoaxbusterscall.com. You'll see those posted up there alongside the most recent episode of Chris's Monday night broadcast, the original Hoaxbusters Call. Also posted up there are various articles and videos. Some of those are original in nature, so make sure you check those out. For any and all things Hoaxbusters, go to hoaxbusterscall.com today. Chris, my friend, how are you doing, sir? Good to have you back from your hiatus.
Oh, I'm doing well. Getting back into the flow, trying to get it adjusted. But it's going good. Going real good.
Oh, good. Good. Yes, we had a couple of special reports that came out recently. Make sure you check those out. The most recent punk rock, and of course, Chris and I were both in Las Vegas covering the debate there.
Yeah, still recuperating from that. Still hungover.
Oh, yeah, I was just I've still got sand in my boots from being out in the desert there. But in any case, it's the month of October. It's nearing Halloween. And I was feeling pretty Halloweeny. And I thought, who better to get on? I immediately thought of the movie Halloween with Jamie Lee Curtis, the first one. And of course, thought of that really terrible movie Trick or Treat used to be on HBO like 5 times a day when I was a kid. And who better to celebrate Halloween with but our good buddy Jay Dyer from jaysanalysis.com. Jay, if you're not familiar with the Afternoon Commute, you will take note that Jay has been a guest on the Afternoon Commute for every month for a very long time.
About 20 years. I think it's our silver anniversary coming up.
Yeah, 20 years. Yeah.
Wow. Oh.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah, we've been doing this for a while. But yeah, check out jaysanalysis.com. His book is coming out, Esoteric Hollywood. You can go there and pick up a copy. And Jay writes on all sorts of interesting subjects. I've read a good amount of his articles over a long period of time, and probably listened to all of his audios. So good stuff. Good stuff there. All around, so make sure you go check that out. Jay, how you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me back on Hoaxbusters Afternoon Commute. Always fun. Always love being on here. My CIA handlers always grant me Hoaxbusters. They say since I do such hard work for the deep state that I can have a little fun on Hoaxbusters.
Yeah, that's.
Nice,
yeah, I can understand that. Well, we don't really bash Jews too much, so I know you're actually a secret Jew as well.
I've been called everything. I'm sure you guys get it too, don't you? You guys get called something. Who you working for somebody?
Well, HBC, I mean, that stands for Hebrew Broadcasting Corporation. That's what Chris is not telling you.
It's not Hebrew, but it is kosher.
Well, I got to meet Chris finally, so
yeah, we met in Memphis.
I could tell with that hook nose and how Chris was cheap with his money. Chris was niggardly with his money, so there we go.
Oh, yeah. What they're not telling you is when they said they met in Memphis, they meant Memphis like in Egypt.
Yeah, it was a Masonic meeting, right?
I did complain about the parking, didn't I?
Yeah.
That was Jay's tip-off that I was a Jew.
Exactly. And the truth is, I worked for the Aryan Underground, by the way.
Oh, was that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm neo-Nazi.
Well, you were on red ice recently, so I can understand that.
Exactly.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But yes, so let me see here. What do we got?
By the way, we're just kidding, right? That's joking.
You guys are joking. Not me. I'm a what do you call it? Odin. I worship Odin now. So because I went on red ice, that means I worship Odin.
Oh, yeah, right. He makes you swear an oath to Odin before you go on.
He means the heavy metal band Odin from the 80s.
Oh, well, yeah. Who is it? Yeah.
Yeah, he meant the band from Decline of Western Civilization too. Yeah. So Jay, you recently did a Tragedy and Hope Part 7, which is really good, and Chris posted up that on Hoaxbusters there. And actually, you've been going over the entire book, which Chris and I have talked about a little bit. And then, actually, when we get to the last chapter, we'll definitely have to have a big discussion on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, but this is a very interesting part that you're bringing up here in this chapter because Quigley, a little bit in the last part that he did, he starts to touch on nukes, and he's actually quite sarcastic in his tone about when he's talking about nukes. And so even more so in this particular thing, I'm not going to take up too much of the time here, but I did find something recently that you guys might think is interesting in a book that I'm on and off reading for probably a couple of years. Ever since having children, I can never finish a book within a year now, when I used to read like 50 books a year. So this book is called Knowledge, Morality, and Destiny by Julian Huxley. Okay? Now, here's what he says in a bunch of different spots, but this is going to parallel what we're going to talk about. The scientific doctrine of progress is destined to replace not only the myth of progress, but all other myths of human earthly destiny. It will inevitably become one of the cornerstones of man's theology, or whatever may be the future substitute for theology, and the most important external support for human ethics. Once men come to be concerned with the realization of new possibilities of experience and of personal development rather than the simple passage of one natural stage of life to the next, new types of ritual or celebration are required. These may be concerned with promotions in hierarchies of rank or within degrees of learning or steps of progressive initiation into sacred mysteries. The society of the future will need to devise new ways for coping with the variety of such situations. Okay. It is often asserted that science can have no concern with values. On the contrary, in all fields of social science, and in rather a different way, wherever the applications of natural science touch social affairs and affect human living, science must take account of values, or it will not be doing its job satisfactorily. The population problem makes this obvious. As soon as we recall that population is merely a collective term for aggregations of living human beings, we find ourselves thinking about relations between quantity and quality of the human beings in the population and quality of the lives they lead. In other words, values. But time is of the essence for the contract. If before the end of the century the rate of human increase is not lowered, instead of continuing to rise, so many values will have been damaged or destroyed that it will be difficult to recreate them, let alone build a new and better system. It has taken 10 years for the atomic threat to affect the world through thought and action. How long will it take for the less spectacular but more insidious reproductive threat to do so? Just as the horrible destructiveness of atomic warfare is now prompting a reconsideration of warfare in general, it seems likely to lead to the abandonment of all-out war as an instrument of national policy. So I would predict that the threat of overpopulation to human values like health, standard of living, and amenity will prompt a reconsideration of values in general and lead eventually to a new value system for human living. All right, so I find that to be interesting on multiple levels, especially since a while back I read on multiple calls, I read a passage from a book that's not. I think it's not that too hard to find. You can find it on Amazon. It's called The Politics of Contraception, and it's written by Carl Gerasi, the guy who who's given credit as inventing the pill. And so anyways, in this book, he's going over about how the term the pill actually was coined by Aldous Huxley. And then he goes into the section where he talks about how Huxley got the idea for calling it the pill was actually from a speech given by Leo Szilard, okay? Or however it is you pronounce that guy's name. And Szilard is he's an interesting guy because he's the guy who's one of the guys credited with inventing nuclear fission. So he's a nuclear physicist, but he decided that he would give up his whole nuclear fission thing and become an advocate for population control. Right? And so that was bizarre that he, picked those two particular fields. And you tend to see this connection here with this people who are into the nukes there in the beginning, who come up with this whole fake nuke idea. And then they switch over into this overpopulation myth as well, right? And I think that the two things are connected. One, because they're both myths, but I thought it was interesting too that that Huxley says that the atomic threat is going to lead to the all-out end of war entirely, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's very interesting because I'm wondering if down the line, and I'm just proposing this, I'm not saying that this is happening now, but I do think it is happening now in certain areas, probably not in Syria or places that we have actual, we can actually identify as having conflict, but that the threat of nuclear war will lead to the creation of, the end of war altogether, but the population may still think that there are wars going on, kind of like in 1984 where there really isn't any war, but the population gets told that there's war all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have, once again, nukes are always brought up. Chris and I were discussing how nukes got brought up in the debates. Russia's got, 1,800 nukes ready to go. And you got to be scared of Russia again. And so there's this constant background of nukes, right? And I just wanted to read that one little passage there to provide that, Julian Huxley's, Julian Huxter, more like it, that this is something that is ongoing, and Quigley talks about this in Tragedy and Hope in 1966. And he gives you the full background that these were not scientists. These were not physicists managing nukes. These were bankers and lawyers. And those were the guys who actually came up with this whole idea of nuke technology. And that even the scientists that were involved with it were controlled. Like that, they actually did have guys who were real scientists, but that they were actually told what to do and what to say by bankers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the most amazing point that Quigley makes, I think, in that whole chunk of the book that I did, is that the new age is characterized by scientism, quantification, and atomics, as you said. And the threat of nukes is precisely what Quigley says is the inauguration of the new international order. And that's because Alexander Sachs and Bernard Baruch proposed the creation of the UN Security Council because of nukes. So the two world wars, which were pretty devastating, had to be surpassed by the next much more devastating, supposedly, right, threat. Because we had one world war and then we had one that was even worse. And it's kind of like, remember how the shootings, the stage shootings, the numbers just kept growing to where in Orlando he's taken out like over 100.
Yeah.
So the system kind of has to make it more outlandish and more science fiction oriented. And I think that that's what they did here. Oh, the nukes are going to cut the planet in half. You know, they're going to destroy entire continents. They're going to do all this nonsense. And it just put everybody into total shock, total panic. And
200 billion degrees.
That's the whole basis for the UN Security Council. We got to, which is just a form, an attempt, a stage, a business phase, right, in the global government. And you're absolutely right to tie it to population control because, ironically, a lot of these people, like you're talking about, who will be involved in all these programs, they'll turn around and say, mankind is the disease upon this earth because he created nukes, you see. You see, a lot of these green globalist types are the ones who support the establishment who created the nukes, and then to say, oh, it's man that is the disease upon Gaia, planet Earth, that has to be controlled, eradicated, put into balance, whatever the propaganda is about population control. And that's because of the danger and the threat that he proposes to the planet because of nukes.
Yeah, that's interesting, too, that you bring that up because, well, one from what you were stating earlier about the UN, of course, that fits in perfectly with me reading that quote from Huxley because he started UNESCO. So he's tied into the United Nations there. He is probably one of the most renowned writers on overpopulation myth, for generating that throughout popular culture. I've got multiple actual 1960s Playboy magazines where I got the actual Playboy magazine for the articles, of course. With his articles in it on overpopulation, which is a great magazine to publish in about, sterilization and overpopulation because the man who's going to be reading that magazine is not going to be interested in having sex because he wants to procreate. So, Huxley's, Julian Huxley is tied in that way. And then also, what was the other point you just said? I forgot. Darn it.
That a lot of the proponents of the establishment then turn around and point out that man has created nukes and therefore is the cancer on the planet.
Right, which Huxley's the eugenicist who created the term transhumanism. He's all about transhumanism. He was the prime original promoter of the idea of transhumanism. And he's also a greenie, like an early greenie, like back in the 60s, like talking about, even in this book here, there's a whole section on how he literally says farmers are bad. He says farmers are bad because they destroy the landscape, they're destroying the earth by farming, and we need to create more space on the earth. Because and by having less people on the earth, then there'll be, there's like a beautification process. Of course, the modern term, since the 90s is rewilding. So all of these guys are all tied into that. So it's like you said, like they give you the myth of the nuke, the nuke's bad, but see, it's our fault, it's my fault that nukes got created.
Yeah, I think it's great too that you mentioned quantification, because that's a big part of that chapter, Quigley's chapter, The New Age, where he talks about Rand Corporation, game theory, cybernetics, Vannevar Bush. And I actually argue that that's one of the most important chapters in the book, because he predicts artificial intelligence, transhumanism, all based on this philosophy of total quantification, which is tied into materialism, of course, pragmatism, empirical philosophy, and all that, and the rise of the military-industrial complex. That's what that chapter is about. Military-industrial complex is run by PR people, he says, who employ compartmentalized actual scientists. And what Quigley says is that what a lot of these actual scientists were doing, unbeknownst to them, was basically research for actual weapons. Now, and we know that's how we get, the internet through DARPA, which was in the 60s, ARPANET, and then DARPANET, which was transferring packets of information right across the country for cryptography, for, espionage and all this kind of stuff. So the people thought, right? So in other words, you have to create this giant perception of this, evil empire that's out there that's going to sabotage the U.S. and destroy the American way of life, all this stuff. And this is what motivates all the people. You John, you've talked about this with Silicon Valley and the perception of Cold War and how that sort of marshaled all the energy of the conservative right wing out there in California to, go into the tech realm. And that's all just another arm of this military industrial complex that Quigley's talking about in this chapter. And interesting too, that another big figure in this whole nuke scenario is the character of Dr. Edward Teller, the father of atmospheric aerosol chemtrail spraying, which I do believe is real. And as I said in the talk, I don't know, maybe you guys, I don't know exactly what the whole plan of it is, because they cloak it in so much climate change talk. It's hard to make out what they are really doing with this. And, we've talked about different possibilities on the show before. I'm not trying to fall back into debating chemtrails or anything like that. But what I'm getting at is that you start to see that, quote, Manhattan Project and, quote, Atomic Energy Commission, these are just kind of umbrella terms for a private military industrial complex that is essentially, I would say, concerned with weaponizing all of creation in a way. In other words, and the reason I say that is, in the sense of, say, William Engdahl's first book, Full Spectrum Dominance, it's like, how can we take culture and weaponize it? How can we take the environment and weaponize it? And weaponizing the environment may not mean, turning everybody into like a nanotech drone zombie or something. Weaponizing the environment can be done through Agenda 21 and the things that we're talking about. It can be done through saying man is the problem.
Right. That's interesting too, because one thing that I'm, sometimes you go back and you read this stuff that you forget about. And one of the buzzwords I see in these guys' stuff from the 60s is ecology, and this idea of, this new kind of this new form that they called ecology, that and the betterment of the ecology. Of course, Gregory Bateson's book is, you're mentioning cybernetics and all that stuff. Of course, his book is called The Ecology of the Mind, and then Huxley talks about ecology playing a big role in the betterment of the human existence and all this. And transhumanism is sold on ecology, on the idea of ecology, because, once everything is mechanized, then it's going to be a better world. It's going to be cleaner.
Yeah.
You're not, it's all going to be, that's one thing that you do see in the green stuff with the Agenda 21 and the connection with the transhumanist stuff is that we're going to have a cleaner world once the singularity comes in. And
that's in Marx and Engels, by the way, if you weren't aware. Marx and Engels talk about the ability of man to be reconciled to the environment, his alienation from the environment, which industrialization causes, they say. And so, interesting too that you mentioned Huxley there talking about the religious conception and the replacement of theology with scientism, because another way that they sell the ecology movement, the green movement, all that now, is precisely through the transference of religious concepts, not just to scientism, but also to the environment. And Huxley makes that clear. Aldous makes that clear in his one of his other lesser known famous books, The Perennial Philosophy, where he outlines this sort of ecumenical syncretist approach to where, he's saying, all the religions in a total Masonic sense, they're all just talking about the same thing. And what they're talking about is the environment. They're talking about the world. They're talking about when we think of God out there, that's just a reflection of man projected onto the noumena out there and the beyond. But it's just mankind. And when mankind is worshiping these forces that he believes are out there or whatever, it's just really just the embodiment, the personification of nature. And that's the entirety of Huxley's project. That's why that's why this ties into the ecumenical movement, because that's the basis of the ecumenical movement, is the transitioning, right, of all these different religions and traditions and whatnot into the global sphere of the idea that we're all just saying the same thing. And that requires, of course, I would argue, different relativism, subjectivism, materialism, all the same culprits that I always bitch about. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and another thing too is that, and Huxley says it in this book. I don't have time to find the quote, but he talks about what you were just talking about there, industrialization, like in the Marxist sense. Now he makes a good point, because this is true. He says industrialization of a nation causes population growth to slow, right? Because when we industrialize, then as the theory goes, I'm not saying this is completely and totally true, but this does get chalked up to population growth slowing. Is once people are industrialized, then they stop having kids, right? They start doing other things. They have leisure time. They're making money, and so they're not
Quigley
preoccupied.
talks about this too. Yeah, Quigley mentions it too.
So the funny thing is it's not funny, but it is funny. He says, well, don't get any ideas that we need to go like industrialized places, or that we don't need to deindustrialize the West. He says, actually, we need to deindustrialize, but come up with better contraceptives.
Exactly.
It's pretty funny. He's just like, yeah. He's like, yeah, people are talking about industrializing, like, going out and helping people. And all. He's like, we don't want to do that. He's like, we just need better contraceptives.
What's interesting also is that if you remember in Brave New World, he says that the future world socialist society will also keep certain areas in the older state of being, or third world, or whatever you want to call it, old world. And they have these places are kind of living reservations of museum, like living museums, kind of.
Yeah, he says in this book, which I recommend people go check this book out, Knowledge, Morality, and Destiny. It used to actually be called at one time New Bottle for New Wine. But he talks about, so he's talking about like Sumatra and Bali and Java and these areas, which Chris and I actually discussed on our conversation about Tiki. So these areas were being, colonized, taken over, and there's obviously a dialectic between industrialization and tribalism in the form of, like we can debate, like, okay, do you leave a culture alone and not go industrialize it, or do you come up with like something that can help people? Like that's debatable, right? And it's only debatable within the confines of this system that we currently exist in, because we can't necessarily say that industrialization and westernization of everything is good, right? But just for the sake of argument, within the confines of it, of what Huxley is proposing, he's saying like, oh yeah, we need to keep like areas like Bali. We need to keep those areas pure because it's such a beautiful, it's so, and he comes across as such an elitist, such a prick, because it's so beautiful to like see these like people like existing in their grass huts and their, in this old way of life, right? And I'm not saying that culture, it wasn't at one time good. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the way that he's seeing it is from an elitist perspective of like a Margaret Mead or an anthropologist or something from his brother's perspective of Brave New World, we're like, oh yes, we're going to have, like you just said, like we're going to have these little areas that are untouched because we're so good, we're so philanthropic, and we need to be reminded of this, of like, we're going to live in this highly advanced technological grid where everything's controlled, but we're going to keep like these old areas as kind of like a zoo, like you go see like these old ways of life,
Yes, exactly. And it shows you, too, that the whole idea for world government is old, right? And this is not like a new thing. It's not all the stuff that you hear in like the typical alternative media patriot crowd type stuff. Like these guys have been planning this for much longer than what most people think. And, let's see, there was a section I was looking for in Quigley where he talks about, that one thing I wanted to say too is that, and I know that you guys already know this, but it's interesting that he says that the nuke threat and the transition into the bipolar world, he says that this of necessity forces the entire system to move out of all of the older ways of doing things from the time of the Renaissance forward. So all the older conceptions of nation states, like you would get out of, Europe and the Protestant Reformation and all the ideas of the kings and this little nation state versus 30 Years' War and all that kind of stuff, as well as the economics of laissez-faire. He says all of that has to go. Like it's forced into a new way of doing things, which is the planned society, the rule by experts. He talks about on page 866 here. And that, again, what's interesting is that for Quigley or Huxley or any of those characters, they in this sense, they agree with Marxism, right? So Marx said not just that industrialization would, lead to these periods of like, alienation and all that, and in Marx's mind, he thought it would, of course, would lead to the proletariat revolution. That would bring the next stage of a big state communism, which would then be followed by the withering away of the state. But they actually do agree with Marx that you would get this global order that would be socialist in a sense, a Fabian type model, and what most people forget is that Marx believes that can come through technological mechanization. So Marx saw the Industrial Revolution and technological automation not as a bad thing, and industrialization in Marx actually wasn't a bad thing, because Marx thinks that these things are necessary historical phases, and that's what's important to keep in mind. A lot of people don't know that. I know I've kind of harped on that in different talks and interviews, but it's important because people think Marxism was something that kind of died and went away. in a sense it did in its classical form. No, there aren't really Marxists out there, but what is out there is this kind of morphed Medusa, or not Medusa. What am I thinking of? This kind of monster that's kind of morphed into the global democratic capitalist, monopoly capitalist version, which is sitting on top of socialism, right? So it's like socialism for everybody down below. And then, of course, it's the oligarchs at the top and their families that are going to have, the automation, all the benefits, basically, that come out of the society. And everyone else is going to be herded into mega cities and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I know I'm rehashing stuff that we've talked about a lot, but what's so important is that Quigley says that in this chapter. He says that it almost sounds Marxist, right? Like it's a necessary stage of history to move into managerial rule by experts, the planned economy, global planned economy. All of this, he says, is just the next stage. And I think that that's part of the psyop, too, that these people operate under, is that they just kind of declare it necessary. Oh, well, this is just the necessary phase, right? You don't want to be on the wrong side of history, do you?
Yeah, here's something I want to put in here at this point is that we're talking about nukes and how they're talking about the nukes or the concept of nukes. So that's all you need is the concept that there's nukes, that there's this super weapon that, like, say, the Russians, just as an example, have their hands on. And see, this represents a threat to, the so-called civilized world. So what does that communicate is that, well, see, now these so-called states out there, or nation states, like Russia, them having this ability or this capability is a bad thing. It's a threat. And by extension, the whole idea of these autonomous states are bad as well, And the same thing is kind of the same. It's the same sort of line of reasoning that's being put across with like gun control. Like guns in the hands of individuals are a bad thing because individuals can't be trusted with that kind of power. Even there's that UN quote. I don't know exactly where it's from, but it says that the private ownership of guns it's not consistent or not keeping with the. Or it's in conflict with having the monopoly of power reside in the state, which is I know I butchered that quote, but it's something along that lines, a legitimate power monopoly of the state or something like that. So it is essentially the same concept, except for we see the same kind of reasoning or so-called reasoning being played out on multiple fronts, like with with geopolitics and this idea of nukes, and they're very convenient for communicating that, which very same thing, which has been like what you're talking about, which is like the goal, which is the ultimate goal.
Is that a Mao quote?
What's that again?
I said, is that a Mao quote? I can't remember what the private ownership
was out of. I'm going to try to look it up. Y'all can go ahead talking while I see if I can find that.
Well, what I think is the common factor across the board, and I think I mentioned this in the interview with Tim Kelly a few months ago, was that both of the monopolistic, capitalist, oligarchic, fascist approach, as well as the communist, Marxist, socialist, Fabian, what they share in common, and why the CFR wanted that convergence for so long that Quigley talks about, is because both of them share the goal of a homogenized monoculture and standardization. So both systems have that process. And in the sections where Quigley is treating the Cold War and Stalin and all this stuff, he talks about these failed plans of the Soviets for these collective farms. And you might think, well, that was all just a big disaster. And no, but interestingly, if you think about it, the whole Soviet method of the collective farm and the attempt to have this communist Marxist totally egalitarian farming situation for millions of people, which actually resulted in the deaths of millions of people, at least according to the official story of Stalin and all that, which I'm sure is probably mostly correct. I don't really, I guess somebody could debate that, but yeah, assuming that's correct, the reason it fails is irrelevant because, or excuse me, the failure of all of the collective farms is irrelevant because all it was the test bed of the system to down the road move into the green system. You see what I'm saying? So, in other words, the methodology and approach of the collective farms and collective agriculture that you see with Stalin and Khrushchev, it is basically the same approach that the ecology movement and the green movement want to do with agriculture, farming, globalism, and all this, right? They want to have a total global control over all of those things. And you see this in the U.S. with not big pharma, but big agri, right? Big agri wants to control all the farms. They're going to have the genetic modification. And just like with Stalin and his collective stuff, they would sell it by all the promises, right? See, the old system had all these, it was all based on capitalism, and it was based on private ownership of farms. And look at all the problems you see. So you have the problem there, right? The new system is going to give you all these grand promises, right? You're going to have, everybody's going to be fed, everybody's belly will be full. And now we see it with the exact same thing. We say, Monsanto and the GMOs, they're going to feed the world. Everybody's going to be fed. We won't have crop failures. We won't have hunger. And it's all the exact same managed society like the Soviets, just like in the U.S., right? There's a great documentary, I forget the name of it, but it was comparing the Soviet system with the system in the West. And they were pointing out how similar it was, right? Like, so in the U.S., you might have Coke and Pepsi. But if you were to go over there, it would be like, the party's Coke, party Pepsi, right? Like the Pepsi of the Soviet party or something, right? I mean, if you got light bulbs, it would be Victory light bulbs, right? Like out of 1984. Commie Coke.
Mr. Dyer, maybe you like to try some state-sponsored soda pop for you,
exactly,
for your family.
Yeah, and you know what else?
Cola.
You know what? Remember that documentary on standardization and planned obsolescence, light bulb conspiracy? Oh. This documentary I'm trying to think of, I can't remember the title of it, but it's basically, it has some of the same points in it. It's like the Soviets system, they would actually, one of the reasons that they in certain areas couldn't compete is because they would try to, if they came up with a light bulb, they would try to push the light bulb that worked for a long time. But because the world was moving into the consumerist society, which is what the Rand Corporation was pushing, then if you're pushing a light bulb that lasts 10 years, 20 years, you're going to be put out of business because you're not going to make the profit that would be able to keep up with the company or the world, actually the global market that's based on planned obsolescence. So all I'm saying is that it shows that the Soviet system, in my view, was once again just a kind of test tube to try out these different things in different regions, try out different methods of total control and see what worked best. And since the Soviet one didn't work that great, the one in the West, which is very similar, pretty much the same one, but it's dressed up in different garb, gives the impression of a little more freedom. That one works a lot better than the sort of top-down, Stalin presenting himself as a new czar, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the American model, the Western, we do indeed, I think, have in some respects more, quote unquote freedom. I mean, we pretty much. I mean, we could say whatever we want to say and put it out onto onto a podcast and what have you, or some platform, or if you can get a platform, you can talk, put out whatever you want to talk about. But now supposedly, they have all these kind of tight restrictions on speech, like in places like China, or Soviet Russia or the former Soviet Union. Now, how much of that is true, I don't know, or how. Another thing with all of this is like, so that's the official position, but how strictly is all of that enforced in those countries, and like what is the listener Don sent me a link to an article about how sarcasm is they want to outlaw sarcasm in North Korea, and so it's like, well, I mean, that tells you there must be a lot of sarcasm going on in North Korea. So, what's going on there?
Well,
so,
remember the stories of the one-child policy? I'm not in China. I'm not saying that there wasn't a one-child policy in China. I'm sure there was, and I'm sure that there were attempts to restrict this. But when you stop and think about how many people are in China, so we're told, right? Well, there's like 1 billion Chinese people, or some, how, if you stop and think about how you would enforce that.
Yeah, I've heard too that the one-child policy, that the way to get around it is just to bribe an official, like the U.S. $1,000 U.S. or something like that, and that then you could have a third child or two children or whatever, $1,000 child or whatever.
Right.
It's just it's open bribery there, like right. Yeah. So how do you control 1 billion people? That's a real good question. And do they? Or is it just this? When I try to make the point as frequent as possible, is like, I mean, you're talking about government. You're talking about it's a fictional construct that really only exists between our ears. The real practical ability for them to actually enforce or force anything upon us, they or them or whatever you want to call it, this idea of government, and what they represent as far as a percentage of the population is so insignificant that there's no practical way that they could possibly enforce the so-called law on the populace.
Yeah, elites in China have more than 2 children. So it's the same thing. Like with here, where like we talked about before, with someone like Hillary's not going to get busted for doing stuff that something you or I would get busted for or whatever. It's the same thing in every country, most likely.
Yeah, and it's the same way kind of with the surveillance, which I think shows that the whole Snowden thing was a psyop, was that they're not. I don't think they're really that concerned about people finding out. In fact, I think they wanted them to know the ability, at least, or the degree, or probably exaggerated abilities of the surveillance, so that people would police themselves, right? Which we've talked about, of course, many times. But if you think about it too, I mean, think about how many people it would take to police everybody's speech. I mean, it's just like, it's almost impossible. I mean, even the supercomputers and the metadata and all that, like, it requires tremendous resources to try to sift through this information. So, and I'm not saying that they couldn't, if they wanted to, find out, who's saying what and all that. I'm sure they do, but, it's kind of like Jones used to always say, that a lot of the NSA stuff is primarily for the people in the establishment to be surveilled, which, by the way, is another parallel to the Stalin regime.
Yeah, well, the East German Stasi, they had all kinds of machinations there to make, which I would like. I've looked at different stuff on that, documentaries and stuff. How much of it is true, I don't know. I wasn't there. I just got to say that. But what I gathered from looking at what they're doing, which like you're touching on, Jay, these are, I think, like these countries and like you're talking about the Soviet Russia and stuff, are like big open air laboratories to test, social engineering out on large scales. Right. And, they do this in East Germany with the Stasi, with the surveillance state.
Right.
And it was like, well, it got to a certain point that it was just beyond absurd, where they had like every third person, like part of the spy
What's the
thing.
spy? And that's by the way, what most, and again, I'm not a Stalin scholar or even an expert on Cold War, but everybody who I've talked to, or college classes where we dealt with this, or books that you read, pretty much everybody says that Stalin's whole thing collapsed because of that very thing. Like, everybody was worried about who's going to spy on them, and then Quigley says that the transition from Stalin to Khrushchev was just basically one giant power struggle, and everybody lying and spying on everybody else, and Stalin's power collapsed, and then Khrushchev stepped into the vacuum. So the story goes.
Yeah, and then one thing they would show is, like, okay, for instance, they would take these dogs that are trained to hunt people down. And so if you got accused or you ran afoul of the state, like in East Germany, like, they would take like a cloth and set it down in your, like, desk chair or whatever to get your scent, and they would seal it in a jar and put it on a shelf. So that if they ever had to, like, track you down with a dog, they can pull that rag out and get the scent off of it. Anyway, and then they showed these big warehouse full of just jars with rags in them, and I was like, holy crap. I mean, think about that for a minute. It's just, and they also had, like, they were pulling out these file systems, and they said that it got to the point where they were putting so many files and so many dossiers on people, and they got so voluminous that they got to the point where instead of filing, they would just stuff them into, like, boxes and stuff, and just, no organization or anything. They just had mountains of paper, and it was just. They used poodles, didn't they? I don't know.
There was a little poodle who had he would wear a Soviet commissar outfit, and that's who sniffed you down.
No, I think they did it American style.
They were called the Politburo Poodle. The Poodle Bureau.
You did not want to make fun of poodles in Russia. I'm very, very certain of that, Mr. Dyer. You think it's very funny. Poodles are very vicious. Actually, poodles are bred to be attack dogs. That is true.
For real? Well,
they are vicious little bastards. That's for sure. Chris, you're talking about the jars with the cloths with the Stasi and the files and all that type of stuff. And I just wanted to bring up the obvious point that this is social experimentation, obviously, to see what people, trying to see what exactly what you could get people to do to each other. Like, they have that movie out there that's interesting from what I remember. I've seen a long time, The Lives of Others.
Yeah, I've seen that,
yeah, so... And like, the data collection itself is fakery. That's tricking you.
Yes,
right? Because you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, there is massive supercomputers out there running algorithms on our conversation right now. And we need to be scared of that. We need to not do anything because it's so massive. It's like this huge giant. But see, that's one of its problems too. One of the problems of the super monolithic state is that it becomes so massive that you can't find anything in it.
Yeah.
So, whereas it's scaring the bejesus out of you because it's so monstrous and huge, it works on most people with the background noise. I was just recently talking to someone, and they were talking about. I can't remember what they said, but they said something along the lines of. I remember I brought up. We were talking about credit reports, and I brought up how TRW back in the 80s was a CIA front for data collection.
Mm-hmm.
and that was, a credit reporting agency. But they had that movie, which we talked about a little bit, that Falcon and the Snowman movie, where allegedly these guys were. It was basically like the model for Snowden in a way. The Falcon and the Snowman. They made that movie with Sean Penn and Timothy Hutton. And it's these guys who work at TRW, and they're giving the Russians secrets, and they're walking out with tiles and massive amounts of files and just giving them over to the Russians in Mexico. And so I was telling this to this person, and they said, "Oh yeah, that sounds like conspiracy stuff, right?" And they're like, "Wow, that was in the '80s." They're like, "Well, yeah, I guess they're kind of a liberal-minded person, so they were aware of Edward Snowden and that type of stuff." They're like, "Yeah, I guess it's been going on a lot longer than the NSA." And so I just brought up like the Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, and like the information storing and the control grid in of itself. I mean, it's probably been around since day one of civilization. Spies are as old as prostitutes are.
Right.
Well, they had the confessionals back in the day, right?
Sure, and so it's the same. It's the same thing, but I'm sure, like back in ancient times or whatever you want to call it, is they had these same type of threats that that the all-powerful state is watching over you, and that you better be scared of it. But most of the time, for the most part, it's not really something that's happening.
Yeah.
It's the threat.
It's the perception of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's what could possibly happen to you. I mean, it's the same thing with not paying your taxes. I mean, you could get in trouble for not paying your taxes. There are people out there who have gotten in trouble for not paying their taxes. But there is a percentage of people that you don't know or that you've never heard of who don't pay their taxes and nothing happens to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of non-filers.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason for this, by the way, is I think that the people in power have known for a long time about that principle that we've mentioned many times, that Kissinger said that it's really about perception and not what's the facts are. And so, for example, you go back to Elizabethan England, and the whole modern spy culture arises out of British intelligence, which, as we've said many times, that goes back to John Dee and Elizabeth and all that. And they would have she would have these paintings commissioned of her, these famous paintings of Queen Elizabeth. And she's got, in one hand, she's holding a rainbow showing her rulership or whatever. And then the gown she's wearing is covered in eyes. And so the painting, which presumably I guess a lot of people would have been seeing, the painting itself is a form of symbolic propaganda, kind of telling people, hey, I've got all these spies everywhere. And she was, of course, known for her vast spy network, Sir Walter Raleigh and all these people, and John Dee and all this. And so it was the perception that there were spies everywhere, and who knows to what degree there were and weren't. But the same thing with what they did in the 18th century when they studied panopticism, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. With Michel Foucault, the philosopher, has written on panopticism after the fact, and he talked about how they constructed the prisons in France and in England. This is the ideas of Jeremy Bentham, right, where the guard tower is in the middle, and you don't even have to have guards in there as long as the windows are blacked out or whatever, and all the inmate cells are facing inwards toward the tower, and they're completely open. So the idea here is that you're under constant surveillance, most likely, so you think. And what they noticed was that it just caused everybody to alter their own behavior. So what I'm saying is that that's all that Snowden stuff is just the exemplification of that principle, that it's not possible to enough manpower, right, to police all of this data. But all you need to do is give everybody the impression that you do.
Well, here's an element you can add to the panopticon would be just proposing this. What if you had inmates that weren't really inmates? They were just moles, so to speak, in and amongst the population, so that from periodically they could go in and do a bit of theater where they take one of them out and say, "Oh, we caught you. We saw you doing something."
Yeah.
And then the perception is created like, "Oh, okay, so this is you can get found out if you're." So then and they wouldn't even have to have guards. They wouldn't even have to have anybody watching at all. Just the perception of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's something I've even questioned in recent times. Like thinking about that is, I'm sure that's what a lot of this stuff, with a lot of the fakery and things like that, is like Chris just said, like you could have people planted in there in a prison or something, and guards beat them to a pulp allegedly, or make it look like they beat them to a pulp, and then that scares everybody into doing it, or into obeying. And that's just as time goes on, it becomes more relevant that the fakery is a lot easier than it is to pull things off in real life. I'm obviously not saying that people don't get beat down in prison and that prison's full of moles, even though prison is full of moles too. What I'm saying is what I was alluding to with the Julian Huxley quote, with the warfare and all that type of stuff. We're getting to a point to where people, well, once again, to stem off of what I'm trying to say, giving a explanation. So Jay and I had a conversation over text where he had sent me a National Geographic article, or what did you say? You said something was in National Geographic, and then you and I got into a conversation about how, like, the media is destroying itself, like the old forms of media are dying, but that was actually part of the plan, to have all those old forms to actually die off, like magazines and newspapers and stuff. Mm-hmm. Because, the internet is what they want everybody to be on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody that works at National Geographic or at the New York Times is in on it, that those old forms of media are going to die out. Like, there's obviously people who work there who realize that those are old forms dying, but they're not in on the gag that was something that was talked about long ago, that these would go away, right? And so it's the same thing with old forms of warfare are going to go away. And the old forms of doing things. And I think that what we've seen in the past, especially in the more recent times, is that the old forms of doing things are going away. Not that they didn't pull off fakery in old times or anything like that, but I do tend to think that people really do get killed and murdered and all that type of stuff, and when it comes to power plays and all that and all those type of things, I don't think every single person ever has been shepherded off to a private island somewhere. But that goes on a case-by-case basis. That's not to say that that doesn't happen often. And nowadays, I think what happens is the old form, like I was saying, the old form of warfare will eventually go away, where you won't even need to actually go fight wars anymore. You can just tell people that a war is going on, and then you can also just tell people that, like we just had here. Recently, when I saw a bunch of newspapers, I didn't even know that this happened. but I knew I had a suspicion about it being fake because on every newspaper, from the New York Times to the local newspaper at the newsstand, they just got every newspaper. 13 people killed in the bus accident in Palm Springs. And the first thing I thought of is that it was a fake story, just because of the fact that it was plastered on all over every newspaper. And it's like, why would the New York Times have this on the front page with huge, headlines, like 13 people, die in a bus crash, right? And so there's something shady about this bus crash. So I'm not bringing this up to talk about that particular instance, but what I'm saying is now you can have these events, and they don't need to be real anymore because one, no one's going to go, no one's going to know either way, and no one's going to go out there and investigate it. There's no real journalists anymore who. That's not necessarily true. There's no real journalists in the mainstream anymore who will go out there and get handed a piece of paper by some, official who's just said, okay, here's what happened, right? So it has become much easier over time to be able to just have these controlled environments. And why not do that? Why not when you can?
It fits into everything we've been saying about the creation of the threat, the perception of a threat. Threat doesn't even have to be real. You just create, the stage shootings give the impression that there are just crazed madmen going on shooting sprees everywhere. It's just constant, and then of course, obviously the establishment says, we got to have gun control. The whole story of the nukes, right? Oh, there's a black market nuke network that's just gone rampant across the world. What are we going to do? The AQ-Con nuke network, which is all suspiciously connected to the CIA. Oh, well, we got to have a global, force to police this. Oh, we got the threat of the spies and the Soviet moles everywhere. What are we going to do? Oh, we got to set up surveillance everywhere. We got to have number stations everywhere across the globe. We got to have outposts to listen in on everything for the nukes, for the Russians and the spies, right? So all these threats are just constant. Basically, we're just given a whole bunch of false threats is really what it amounts to for the establishment, for the establishment to extend its goals. And it really is, I think, that simple. That's how the system works. It runs on all these fake threats, and it has to constantly keep upping the ante and rolling them out. You know what I mean? To kind of keep it going. And that's where you get all the stagecraft and all the fakery and all this, all the hoaxery. And, I think you nailed it right there.
You ever see the Vice documentary where they went out and went on the black market to buy a suit? It was a suitcase nuke or something?
Yeah, I have. I've seen, Vice is totally CIA, by the way, but there's a whole bunch of things about Vice that I think show that they're right. Like they're they're going to embed with ISIS. Yeah, right. But we can't stop ISIS, but Vice, right? Vice can go embed with ISIS, give me a break.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're going to go on the black market nuke network. Oh, they're going to talk to this secret organization called the Pink Panthers, who are behind all the diamond smuggling and all right. So Vice can go find them, but Interpol and the CIA and none of these groups can stop all the rogue villains, right? The rogue villains everywhere. That's a big part of the whole, and that's what, when you grow up on Hollywood and you watch movies and all this stuff, the movies always present it that way, right? The rogue villains are all out there, rogue nations, the rogue cartels, the rogue black market. And, like if you watch that, I think it's a mediocre movie, Lord of War, the good point at the end of that Nicolas Cage movie, he realizes that he thought he was this rogue arms trader and he was being protected somehow. And then he finds out who's protecting him. It's like Pentagon generals.
Right? Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because my brother was telling me about that movie. He said that, oh yeah, you hear that they had something come out in Clinton's emails that it goes right along with the script of that movie.
Oh, of Lord of War, really?
Yeah, where some arms trader gets some kind of deal.
He
gets off because he was, like you're talking about, and with the.
I've read the book that it's based on. I'm trying to remember that guy's name. He's like the number one. He's like the Bin Laden of arms trading. They called him in the last 20 years or so. I could go look it up, but
yeah, that's what I was wondering if that film was supposedly based off of a supposed true story, or maybe it was.
Well, actually,
it's
based off of. It's based off of a book roughly based off of a book that did get sanitized and Hollywoodized a bit. But the book that I'm talking about actually calls him out as a CIA guy.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's and now to what degree, that guy didn't know he was working for the CIA, I find that hard to believe, because that's kind of the way the Nicolas Cage movie presents it. Like he doesn't know who's really running things, and then like at the end of his career, he's like, "Oh crap, I've been working for the Pentagon the whole time."
Was that is that how he was able to rent the nuke for his island party, being in that film, and maybe rented nuke?
Well, what John said also reminded me. I forgot about this. We don't talk much because we're adults, but video games have a lot of programming and predictive aspects to it too, and all that, because a lot of the younger generation, they don't really care about movies. They'd rather watch or play video games, and all these. It may be the biggest video game franchise ever now. I don't really keep up with it. I don't know, but the Black Ops series. They're constantly putting in these storylines that deal with global government and, false flag terror and all this kind of stuff. But the technology that they put into every one of the Black Ops games, which is obviously like a recruitment thing to try to get young people, if you join the military, you can use all this cool tech, and, you can scale a building with this, DARPA
you gotta have drones
outfit. But that's the thing. Yeah, the drones are all coordinated with the the soldiers' implants and all that kind of stuff.
Super cool.
Point being, John's right that even the video games show you that. I mean, the title of one of the series is Black Ops: Modern Warfare, right? Mm-hmm. So, modern warfare is not fought like it used to be, meaning it's fought with drones, all this kind of high tech stuff, DARPA stuff. So the idea that you're going to have these, ground forces that fought in the old post-Renaissance style of warfare is ridiculous.
Yeah, we talked about too how they've, even in the Bond films, this goes back kind of ways where this fetishizing technology, gadgetry, and stuff like that, and then of course now you're seeing it within these games and all this stuff where it's like, you spot your enemy out with your little hover drone, and then you can kill remotely and all this other stuff. Yeah, it's just this really grotesque kind of hyper violent tech culture that's being created, and now and then with the drones and all that too, it's interesting how it is, how closely it parallels video games. Like you're watching something on a screen, and it's almost like so even the visuals are sort of, I guess like they'll use different kind of like thermal imaging and stuff like that. So it's almost like you're not looking at anything real,
right?
And they're sitting in Nevada somewhere, and they're remote controlling these things, and shooting people up and dropping Hellfire missiles or whatever they're doing out of these things, and it's like.
And you're gonna so in the future you're gonna walk up to a group of enemy combatants or whatever, and you've got like the Terminator thing in your eye. You've got a Google contacts, and you can see the, enemies are going to be identified, and it pulls them up. And then because you've got an implant, in your brain or whatever, or you can make the decision through retinal movement, right? That the drones that are linked up to your contact lenses or whatever can attack, from the sky, and you can switch from your vision from first person. You can switch up to the vantage point of the drone, right? All this kind of crazy stuff.
Well, yeah, I've thought this too, that maybe they could have. Well, I guess this is totally at this point technologically possible that they can have some kid, like, literally in a basement, thinking that they're playing Xbox, and they're controlling a drone or what have you, but actually it's uplinked to a actual drone and some actual battlefield somewhere, and then they have no clue that they're actually killing real people.
You should write sci-fi novels, Chris, because that is the plot of the award-winning sci-fi novel Ender's Game.
Ender's Game, huh?
Yeah, and there's a movie too, and what they did was they got this kid who, spoiler alert, who's like the best video game strategy type guy, and they recruit him, and they have this big wargaming simulation exercise, which is like a tournament in the military that he's in, this sort of futuristic military thing. And he thinks he's winning a tournament, but the dude is so good that he's actually linked up to the actual battle, which he finds out at the end. Wow.
Yeah, so that came out in 1985, the book, and then they made a movie off of it in 2013.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and that is the plot. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they have the controller that's on the PlayStation. I have this footage saved somewhere. They're talking about, they're in the battlefield and they're interviewing like a soldier, and he's talking about, he's controlling this drone, or it's some kind of a like the Johnny Five robot that killed the guy in Dallas or something like that, one of those things. And it pans down, and he has a freaking PlayStation controller in his hand. It's like it is like verbatim the same controller, like plugged into his his thing, controlling this drone, or it looks just like it. I don't know if it's the exact same controller, but
I wouldn't be surprised because all the video game stuff comes out of the Pentagon.
Yeah, it all comes out of the Pentagon, and that's the thing. Like, I've done a lot of research into that, and had planned to put it into a documentary, but it just keeps on getting sidetracked. But anyway, they are totally responsible for the whole existence of computer-generated imagery that all came out of, university grants out of the Defense Department, and then it, evolved into the stuff that later, the next computer system that was like used extensively in processing of supposed satellite data imagery and all that stuff. That was a big initial contract with that eventually got transmogrified into Industrial Light and Magic, and that was the start of digital editing of film and all that stuff.
And then Disney starts doing it, which I'm sure is tied into all the same stuff.
Yeah, and then because Pixar and all that comes out of that.
Well, remember, even before that, you had Tron.
Right? That was in 1985, something like that.
And everybody was blown away, because that was like the Matrix before the Matrix. Whoa, all this computer stuff. And then they did. I remember watching the DVD commentary on the 80s movie. It's like 1984 or 5 called Last Starfighter. Where the guy plays the video game, which I need to do an analysis of that, because that's exactly the whole point of that movie is what we're talking about. He plays this video game, if you remember, and he's just this poor kid in a trailer park, and he's so good at the video game that these beings come and they recruit him to fight in this intergalactic, battle with these evil aliens, right? In other words, the Pentagon, who are the quote beings, right?
Yeah,
will recruit people based on video games, and so that's the whole plot of that movie. But if you watch the DVD commentary, that movie was famous because it was one of the first movies that used entire scenes that were completely CGI. Tron still had actors, interfacing with a kind of half computer generated imagery and all that, but in Last Starfighter, there's entire scenes, pretty extensive scenes too, that are completely CGI. That's one of the first, or the first. It's not very good graphics now, obviously, but at the time it was a pretty big deal. And then, of course, you made the great point, and I brought this up on Boiler Room several times because the host of Boiler Room, Hasher, he's a big tech guy, and he's done a lot of work with graphic design type stuff, and so he was very interested to hear about Paul Debevak, which is, you brought him to my attention, and you just look at Paul Debevak's career, and you can see him going straight from university to Matrix to government type work. Yeah,
there's a relatively recently a new project that was set up to see what happens is you have the military develop the technology. The technology, of course, gets adopted and assimilated into the private sector. The private sector takes it and develops it for different applications, mainly like, films, video games, entertainment, type consumables. And then the military takes it and reabsorbs that and uses it for, like, you got the example of like the Doom 3D first-person shooter was one of the very first ones of those. And then the Marines take it and use it and do their own version of it and use it for training. And then it kind of goes, back and forth in between. But yeah, it is all of that. All of our modern, everything we know today is that shapes modern entertainment came right out of these military projects. And
that's what Quigley said a long time ago, was that, we know this now, but Quigley pointed out that so many of these tech developments that we think come out of competition and, free market enterprise and all this kind of stuff actually comes out of military industrial complex weapons research.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how you'll see those tournament games where they're all sitting at their individual computers, and they'll be in a big, conference hall or something like that having these tournaments. Well, that's the initial application of that technology was for war game simulators. And that's what you're looking at when you're looking at that. You're just looking at an adaptation of war game simulators. And you think about it, those multi-network computers, of course, you just got to talking about the internet, how that came out of the military, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then, also the multiplayer, virtual environments and stuff that, you have multiplayers, and then, you have your avatar inside of the virtual environment. And that all is, just a different military simulator, which wargaming goes back even, prior to that with, they initially had board games and stuff like that. And then it got later developed into, of course, different types of video games, and then, computer assisted, and then, of course, then virtual simulated environments. But there's a article I have too where I think it's from 1998 or 99. And, it says the military is interested in creating the holodeck.
I've seen that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is one of their goals. Well, I think they're probably well along to achieving that if they haven't already achieved it. But like the holodeck, it's in the Star Trek films where they go into like the same concept that's represented in the Matrix, right? It's the Matrix films kind of takes it on to a different tangent where like people are actually born into it, but the concept was already there with Star Trek, and then, but the idea that the military, got the idea after the fact, and then in the late '90s, that's pretty ridiculous when you look at the actual history of where all this stuff came from. But that's one of the persons they want to recruit was Paul Devebeck. Yeah. And he worked on the Matrix films. He's the one that's attributed to all the groundbreaking special effects with the Neo getting dodging bullets, dodging, and then he's got the 360-degree fly around, which everything you see in the background is completely 100% CGI. And then people will come back at me and saying, if you're proposing that a lot of the footage on 9/11 was fake, which I believe that, you're largely looking at fabricated, and this was the debut of a full-blown psychological operation that incorporates this technology. And if you look at the timing of it all fits. And then there's also reference to this very thing in films that have come after the fact, like the film The Congress, where they're in. Yes. You've seen that film, right? I think you mentioned that before. Yeah, where it's about taking and digitizing actors and saving the digital file, and then they can act in whatever scenario or whatever movie you want. But there's a 9/11 reference in that scene where she's getting scanned in. And I said, well, that's interesting because that's, right in line with all this stuff I'm digging up. And
don't forget, too, that might be the reason why, or a kind of secret reason reference why the Matrix has the reference to 9/11. If you remember, what's one of the famous predictive programming things where Neo's birth date on his passport.
That's a good point.
Is 9/11
exactly that way, but yeah.
And then what is 9/11? Well, it could be this manifestation of this psychological warfare that implements, like you're saying, the CGI.
Which would be the real Matrix. That would be the real Matrix, yeah.
Also, first time I came on Afternoon Commute, we spoke about the first season at that time of Black Mirror. And Black Mirror Season 3 is just now complete, I think, with a few more episodes than most of those seasons. And, of course, every episode of Black Mirror deals with dystopic technology. And this season is everything that we've been talking about. So the season primarily deals with augmented reality. And so if you remember that, it makes me think of that video that you put up a couple months ago about the tech guy talking about how there'll be like these points in the future and everybody will be playing these little games about, I got more points because I brushed my teeth this morning. And
gamification of
yes. So the very first episode of Black Mirror this season is a near future dystopia where everybody lives in these kind of ecological friendly suburban, I don't know how to describe it. It's very, very, very weird, kind of a Tim Burton-esque future where if you remember Edward Scissorhands, like everybody lives in these cookie cutter suburbs, and the whole society, this is what's crazy about it, is a hierarchy based on how everybody's rated everything and how you've been rated. So your points on your likes on Facebook or your whole internet basically is integrated into when people walk up and they see you, then you pop up on their phone or in their Google goggles or their contacts, and they see you and they rate you. So the whole system is based on like the upper class or the people that have 5 stars. So it was just very, very dystopic, but that episode was really good. And then there's another episode. The next 2 or 3 are actually just purely based on augmented reality. And then there's another warfare episode that is exactly what we're talking about. Get this, where in the future, the soldiers have a chip that controls, of course, how they perceive reality under the guise of kind of what I was talking about earlier with the idea of, you're like the Terminator soldier and you've got this screen that comes up into your visual area, your cortex or whatever, and you can you know, you can profile people and all this kind of stuff and get their history and all this blah, blah, blah. Well, what the plot is that this, I'm not going to spoil everything, but it's interesting because the plot is that the soldiers are programmed to see the enemies as these inhuman aberrations.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the people that they're attacking are humans, but they're just perceived to be animals. And I thought that was interesting on two levels, because on one level, obviously, military people are programmed, to view their enemies as inhuman. They're dehumanized. And then on another level, like you could take it literally that, maybe in the future they really will, put a chip in somebody's brain to where the perception that you get is augmented reality, that you actually see this being as like a, inhuman.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is, that's sort of, yeah, right. That's already taking place on one level, and that just takes it to another integration of the same kind of concept where, yeah, instead of just propaganda methods, it's even, technologically, I guess, feasible to do that. Yeah, I mean, you see this game.
That's what that's the Pokemon Go, right? Moving everybody in that direction of. I guess before total Matrix, you need the stage of augmented reality where you've got contacts or something that allows you to kind of have a synthetic overlay, right, of your visual field.
Yeah, and how all of this stuff is going to work itself out into the real world, I guess, is anybody's guess. But yeah, I think the Matrix probably. Well, I do believe that it already exists. I mean, one thing that I ran across when looking into this stuff is like, so people probably they get all their their ideas about what CGI is from watching films, right? I mean, and a lot of it, even to this day, is you could look at something and especially like animals and stuff, and you say, oh, that's a CGI rendering. Maybe pretty good, but it's fairly convincing, but it's, still CGI.
Well, we're being given older versions of it.
Oh yeah. I've even said this before. I think a lot of this stuff, even on like Animal Planet and stuff, is CGI rendered, animals and stuff. Cause you look at some of it and I said, man, that is just too good. Like how the hell, how they capture, and then I'm thinking it's like, well, I mean, this can be synthetically rendered at this point, because now the technology, I got stuff from like the 70s, from early, Defense Department stuff where they're demonstrating computer generated imagery, and it exceeds the stuff that came out in the early 90s with the initial, sort of experimental stuff out of Pixar. And it's like, as far as the rendering quality, and it's like, wow, they didn't even have, see, here's another important aspect to keep in mind is the processing power that's available. And if you're talking about an organization that has virtually unlimited budgets like the military does, of course they're going to have greater processing power. But see, the principle is already there, ray tracing and stuff like that, where you can, simulate photorealistic environments. The limitation on it is the processing power. And according to the stuff I read, that you need a petaflop, which is like, standard desktop computers are operating on gigahertz. Petaflop is 1,000 gigahertz or something on that order, maybe even more. I'm not exactly sure, but even official sources, they've exceeded that a long time ago. And another interesting thing is that if you look at these big supercomputers that the military has, or the government has, and the chips that they use, because there's these big arrays, they're just these interlinked network computers that share processing cycles, and there'll be hundreds and hundreds of these things in racks, rack mounted systems. And guess what the actual chip set that they use in these things is the exact. They use the chip that's in the PlayStation.
Are you serious?
Most recent PlayStation, yeah.
Huh.
And they say that, because the question naturally comes up is like, what are you doing with all this processing power? It's like, we use it to keep track of the nuke inventory. It's like, yeah, that's really interesting. Keep track of the nuke inventory. You need that much processing power to keep track of the nuke inventory? It's like I don't think so.
Couldn't QuickBooks keep track of
like an Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah, right, like a spreadsheet.
No, they need the Roadrunner super petaflop computer to do all this. It's like, I don't think so. But that's the official story on it. But it's the damn Matrix is in there, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you can take. You've seen the video games. They're about there as far as photorealism.
Right.
It's just like I said. The limits are the processing power to render things fully, photorealistic. And I think they've had it. They had it. Well, I think you saw the results on 9/11. I mean that. Now throwing that out there. Why I think that is so is because you talk about as knowing the nature of the military, what it really is, and the concept of perception management, and you gave that Kissinger quote that it's not what's really real that matters, is what's perceived as real. It's like, of course they would. That would be the an ultimate.
That would be the
weapon.
ultimate thing. Yeah, exactly, the ultimate weapon.
And you can make any scenario that you want anywhere in the world that you want because you have the world in a simulated.
Yes. And who's going to go investigate to see if what you're saying's fake? And then even if they do, nobody's going to believe it because they'll have forgotten 2 weeks later.
Right, and people are ignorant about what actually exists. Knowledge is power. They keep it under wraps and give some just ridiculous story about why they need all that processing or exactly what they're doing with it. Now, I understand too that it's also used for modeling complex systems and stuff like that, which they rent it out to do that sort of thing to. Scientific institutions and all that. I understand that, but it, I think it's really telling that it's it's basically a giant PlayStation 4.
There you go. That's the best way to put it. Wow, I didn't even. Yeah, exactly. And then you run simulations to see what the most likely outcomes of different actions would be.
Yeah, I think that too. I think that's an element of this. It's been referred to as sentient world simulation.
Right.
And that there's some public stuff about that.
Right.
And now you'll hear that they can predict with over 90% accuracy certain outcomes of certain things. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, who knows if that's just propaganda, right?
Right, it could be just propaganda, and it kind of is reminiscent of the...
nukes.
Yeah, nukes, or... gauging people's reactions. I think maybe so that they could get some accurate modeling on that. I don't know, but then also the concept of pre-crime. So they're even saying that we can predict when a robbery will take place in a city or something like that. And it's like, I don't know about that, but that's what they're saying. I mean, they're saying all this stuff. They're making all these claims surrounding this, these systems. And
I don't think they're really actually able to predict where the crime's going to happen. I think that they're saying that so that they can sell the implementation of the next level of the surveillance simulation grid. Yeah,
and if you can create the belief in that,
right?
Then that's really reminiscent of
Minority Report.
Yeah, Minority Report, or even like with the Stasi and the Soviet Union kind of stuff they would do. Like, just come and snatch you, and it's like, oh, you're a thought criminal or something.
Exactly.
Or, you got flagged in our pre-crime system. You're about to commit a crime. But it's like, I didn't know that. I was about to take this machete and chop down some weeds in my freaking yard. I didn't know. It was like, whatever. Yeah. I don't know. That might be a little far fetched, but
well, no, that's actually. I've said it many times that's what she says it in her lectures. The IBM CEO, she says that they're going to implement. Now, I mean, she may just be a selling point for what she's trying to push, but she literally says that it's pre-crime like Minority Report in her lectures when she talks about the smart cities.
Oh, well, there'll be pre-crime programs implemented, is what she's saying.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess I changed my mind just now on that, because I've certainly seen enough stuff out there where they're creating the perception in people's minds. I mean, you see, well, it was one film I watched, which I try to look at anything that's supposed to be, dystopian or something like that, future science fiction, stuff like that. I like science fiction, but you see a lot of stuff in these films, and
go
ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What was I was trying to think of the name of it. The dang, Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
You ever see
there
that?
You go. Yeah. In fact, I was thinking about that the other day because the topic of the mega cities and the smart cities came up, and I was thinking, well, shit, that's a great symbolic presentation, because you've got everybody living in this giant high rise, and there's like 8 of them, and under the guise of the fact that the population's too huge in this mega city, so we got to build upward because we can't build outward, and then everybody's under this total police state surveillance. Exactly.
And then, like, one of the characters in there is psychic, so she can see the future.
Oh yeah, she works for the cops. Yeah, right.
Yeah, she works for the cops, and then so she can see the future. So there's another example of getting across the concept that the cops can see, the police and the authorities can see into the future now, and all that, which is of course the theme of Minority Report and these other ones. Like, I know there's other examples. I can't think of them right now, but if you listen to the IBM CEO's talk, she gives these 2 or 3 of them. It's on the IBM YouTube channel. She gives these talks in Singapore and Rio, and she says, in the next few years, we plan to convert Singapore and Rio into operating smart cities. And now,
so
who is this again, Jay? I'm sorry.
Her name is Jenny Ramadi. She's the CEO of IBM, and she's giving these talks, and she's saying, basically selling it to all these corporate tech head people in the audience of these 2 cities, and she's saying, it's going to be so great because I'm not joking. This is what I'm not saying that they really can really do it. I'm just saying this is her selling point. Is she says we're going to have everybody in the city's medical records uploaded to the central database of the AI system that's going to run the city. All the infrastructure of the city will be tied in. It'll be RFID. It'll all be, the net everywhere, internet everywhere, obviously. And she says anywhere that you go, and what you do, you're going to be perfectly safe, because we will have the ability through, the predictive algorithms to implement pre-crime. And she literally says that. Now, obviously, that's probably propaganda, and I don't think that they, like you said, can they really predict the future with 90% accuracy? Who knows? But that is her selling point for implementing the Rio and Singapore smart cities.
Well, Jay, doesn't that make you feel safe and secure, warm all over?
Well, I know it's true because I had a friend who worked low level at IBM, and his whole job, this was like 4 or 5 years ago before he moved on to a new job. His whole job was to just walk in, go into this giant room full of scanners, and his section was tasked with scanning every soldier military records, or excuse me, medical records. So the only reason he had to have a security clearance was just because he was scanning soldier stuff. But all he did all day was sit there and take this big chunk stack, stick it in this machine, and it scanned it for Xerox/IBM.
So what you're saying is that they're aggregating everybody's records as we speak right now.
I believe that absolutely, and that's what Google did the same thing with Google Books. Remember how it was in the news. Jones used to talk about it 5 or 6 years ago. Folks, Google's putting every book. They're taking every book, folks. They're going to take every book. Now that's true. It's true in a sense. They have digitized. Not every book. I don't know how that would take forever, but I can tell you for a fact that they've been digitizing everybody's medical records.
Yeah, well, I imagine that's true, and it's the books. Yeah, well, yeah, you can go in and which is actually pretty cool on one level, though. I mean, the Google Books, because you can search within copies of books, which is pretty freaking fantastic. I mean, I think it's a great application of technology. I mean, don't get me wrong, but yeah, on the other hand, it's like, wow, this is like one company doing all this. Now, Google's the military-industrial complex. I'm 100% convinced of that. Somebody sent me something a long time ago, and it was like, it's just one of those things I haven't really gone and talked about or looked at. But the location of Google and where they're positioned in relation to like defense contracting and all that stuff. It's like, they're obviously just another extension of the complex. But yeah, that's not to change subjects, but this is something I wanted to talk about. Like when me and John were talking about the debates, we just had like an hour there, which is not near a long enough time to kind of go extensively into a lot of stuff. But then I wanted to go into pointing out that, okay, corporations and government are the same. Like that's another thing I think that needs to be pointed out is like, okay, so you have Hillary as representative of government, and then you have Trump representative of corporations, but they're the same. I mean, you got the revolving door between, you see it all the time where you'll have someone that's prominent in corporations go into government and vice versa, back and forth, or there'll be like the attorney on Monsanto go the head of the Department of Agriculture, right? Or stuff like that. And I don't think people are that aware of that fact, is that, you're basically essentially referring to the same entity when you're talking about big government and big business, because they're so integrated and locked at the hip. It's obvious on so many levels. But yeah, the idea that Google would be just a part of the whole military industrial complex and everything, that is not far fetched at all, and that has far more explanatory power as far as how they rose to prominence so quickly.
Yeah. Oh, I think I think it's obvious. I mean, we know of the backstory with In-Q-Tel and Facebook, and In-Q-Tel put money into Google. That was in books by CIA people back in 2005. I've got the book. So there's no doubt that I think all of that whole complex in Silicon Valley, it's part of the same entity. And there is at a level, this idea of competition. Google's going to compete with Facebook, maybe at some level, but not at the top. No way.
Compete with Facebook?
Yeah, you'll see these articles come out every now and then, like, oh, Facebook wants to compete with Google over uploading videos, and so Facebook's going to limit what can be done with links to YouTube because Facebook wants people uploading directly to Facebook now. I mean, I don't believe there's a real competition between Facebook and Google for that. And you remember when Google came out with their social networking thing, Google Plus, and that was like, oh, Google Plus couldn't compete with Facebook and all this stuff.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, they want to create the perception that there's real competition. And yeah, we've talked about that a lot before, where there is no real competition at a certain level. There's real competition on the lower level of economy, for sure. But then, like we're talking on Skype right now. Wasn't this Skype developed by some Swedish company or something? And then Microsoft bought it out.
Mm-hmm.
But,
exactly.
So, which is makes total sense that, okay, they want to, acquire properties instead of like going through all the expenditure of R&D something in development, and then maybe it might be a big fail or whatever. Just acquire something that's already successful.
Yeah, let at the mid level, let the competitive market happen. That's a lot better than exactly trying to manufacture progress. Why not let it happen and then just acquire whoever's thing works the best?
Oh, do you see that article I put on hoaxbusterscall.com? The AT&T is going to acquire Time Warner.
I did, yeah. In fact, I'd seen that in some other news postings. I was like, so yeah, just more consolidation, totally. Which
that is tremendous, isn't it? I mean, that is just over the top. AT&T, think about how big AT&T is. It's like, oh my God. And then Time Warner. I mean, Time Warner is not too long ago, and that's why it struck me, was that, didn't we just go through a bunch of acquisitions that Time Warner had just got to finish doing? Like, not too long ago?
Yeah, Time, and then Time Warner Brothers, yeah.
Yeah, and then they've,
and then a whole bunch of other things, right.
Yeah, and then now AT&T and Time Warner are going to be one. Well, yeah, and then it goes to
AT&T is the world's biggest internet provider. I know because
internet provider. Wow.
Yeah, I worked at AT&T for a year or so in sales.
What did you do in AT&T in sales?
Yeah, just selling iPhones. But I think I mentioned it a couple times on like the early chats we had. Like we had to take a bunch of courses, and we went to the giant regional data center, which they even told us when we went there in Nashville that it stores all the internet traffic for this whole region, which is like 3 or 4 states. And you go to this facility, which was a former government facility, by the way, and you can't go to the lower levels. You got to have like a security clearance to go down there, and then the lower levels are just all these servers that's storing all the data. So they told us, that's what they were like, yeah, this is all the internet data and traffic for this whole region.
Wow.
And so, by the way, I was taking that class at the time of the Snowden stuff first coming out. So I'm sitting here saying, Snowden's not going to change anything. And people were arguing with me at the time. They were like, oh yeah, this is going to change the whole system. I was like, dude, I just went to the fucking data center in Nashville and stood on top of the entire region's traffic, and I was like, that ain't going to be shut down. It's private. It's owned by AT&T. So even if the NSA was shut down, which wouldn't happen anyway, the private NSA, which is AT&T, is still everywhere.
Yeah, I like how and here's the thing too, and it's all, what I harp on constantly is legalese. It's like, the government's not collecting your data. It's like, okay, so they're not technically collecting it, but AT&T is and giving it to the government. Like, big difference, right? I mean, what's the difference? But no, I mean, now you can with the corporate structure, and then the like I said, they're all integrated at a certain level with the government and corporations. They're defined though as distinct entities, but in all this milieu of all these different contrivances, is artificial fictions of legalese and everything, they can make out any statement, and it's like technically, legally true. No, we didn't do that. But see, now they did do it, but they didn't do it in the way it's going to read on paper, right? Because it's legalese.
Yeah, it's like, it reminds me of the people who think that they can petition the government for a FOIA request, and that the government is like, now we got to tell the truth, and we can't lie because of a FOIA request.
Yeah, you get a FOIA request. Yeah. I know. I love that. I mean, and then, people will make a lot out of it, something that came out of a FOIA request. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because it reminded me. Okay, this WikiLeaks stuff. Now, I want to get your take on that, but before I do, I want to tell you something I heard. Somebody was talking about how, like in the emails, they exposed they're talking about UFOs and the Disclosure Project in the emails. So I guess I was like, come on now, damn it. It's like, I know my take on WikiLeaks thing is a scam. I mean, it's a scam. I mean, come on. But it's like, after I heard that, I was like, yeah, so this is just another example of how all this stuff works.
I don't know what to make of it, honestly, because I've argued all along that it is a scam, and I do think it still is. And I think that Assange is fake and all that. I think a lot of those emails are real, though. So maybe people at the level of Podesta and campaign people, they probably don't know like how all this stuff really works. They're, at a certain level, compartmentalized level. And it could be giant theater, which again, I do think WikiLeaks is a limited hangout sort of thing. And that's why you see, by the way, WikiLeaks was a big deal. And then when that kind of expired, who took the center stage? Snowden. Snowden got old, so they trucked out Assange again. You see.
Oh, Pamela Anderson poisoned him with a vegetarian panini sandwich, so he's dead now, right? Cheers.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I have no idea what is going on with all that. I don't think it's real, but I don't know what the deal is. Like, why? Because I do think they're real emails. But I've noticed that if you paid attention to WikiLeaks, what they've done is released baloney crap and then a little bit of stuff like cables, which is not that big of a deal. So they mix, it's kind of gray propaganda. Like they'll mix a little bit of real leak in with a bunch of crap and what is called targeted leaks. Like there's a good article that Patrick did, or somebody at 21st Century Wired, I don't remember who did it, but it was about the Panama leaks, which were pretty clearly targeted leaks. So fake whistleblowing, fake leaking is a classic tactic to smear people or divert, or make a certain person look like a bad guy when the real bad guy is somewhere else. So that could be. I mean, I'm not saying I do think Hillary Clinton's a bad guy. So I don't know why. I haven't figured out yet why they would leak a bunch of stuff just on Hillary, because I've been under the impression, and I'm not saying that Trump's real. I've been under the impression that they're going to go with Hillary in all this. So, what do you think? I don't know why they would. If Assange is fake, why would they do that? Unless maybe there's like a level of people who just really don't like Hillary in the government. I guess that's possible, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. It's almost like Hillary is the clear choice, and why come out with damaging stuff like up to the election? Why allow it to come out? And it was even alluded to in the debates, right? Chris Wallace brought it up, right? I think it is, because I've said this too before. It kind of goes in line.
Oh, I remember when we were eating, you said that, right? That to get rid of the system as it is. Yeah,
they want to. I think that there is. How long this is going to take, I don't know. How many more actual elections will be, I have no idea. I'm not going to try to make any predictions or anything. But I do think that this current political system Now, something you've talked about a lot too is the rise of scientism, right? You brought this up in doesn't Carroll Quigley refer to it?
Right.
Another refer to it.
Quigley's been saying the system as it is has to go. So that would seem then to include the existing political structure, even already rigged, but to move it into a new phase.
Yeah, and then they've talked about too the merger of the Soviet and the West, and then that's part of the third wave, right?
Right.
And the Soviet means rule by council, so they have the rise of the NGOs, and then at the same time we're seeing this heavy move toward the popularization of like science and scientism, and Oppenheimer I think was the first example of what he's like a theoretical physicist and a science kind of popularist type,
right?
And then you were saying that Quigley referred to him as sort of this public. Now what did you say that he referred?
He calls him a great administrator and cultural critic.
Yeah, there you go. And that's who is Neil deGrasse Tyson and those Bill Nye and those type of people. They're not, or Michio Kaku probably would be a better whenever he's a theoretical physicist. Yeah, they're these popularists, science and social commentators among other things, and they're being really played up, I believe, in this phase. At the same time, the whole conception of politics and the political system is being just disintegrated, like broken down.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. And I think, too, that it adds a lot of additional drama to the whole theatrics. That's part of the whole thing, because I think it's inconsequential as far as Hillary supporters go. They don't give a damn what's coming out in these emails. It could say that Hillary Clinton gave birth to xenomorph or something. It wouldn't it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, or that she sacrificed babies, and they wouldn't care.
Yeah, while giving birth to a xenomorph, like eating baby, any the most gruesome thing you can think of could be in there, and it wouldn't matter. To the Hillary diehards out there, people who vote, I think, generally speaking, I'm not saying everybody, but people who I think generally speaking who vote are just really just reactive. They're just reflect. They reflexively, and compulsively go and get caught up in this sort of psychodrama. Well, it's a psychodrama. It's like a sports team, and people are devoted to the Chicago Bears because they're from Chicago and they've grown up. Dad took them to the football game and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, and then we've seen the same thing in sports too, where somebody gets brought up on some like really serious charges. So about something they did, like to beat the hell out of their girlfriend or something, they almost die or something like that, and then they get right back out later, right? Or they're not they're not totally disowned by the sports fans of it's a lot of even the worst kind of crimes. It's not it's different if you're a high prominent sports figure. I always saw the pedophile guy come out with Sandusky and
Penn State, exactly.
People just make any kind of mental gymnastics possible and make excuses for the guy because he was the hero. He's like sports. What did he actually do? He was like a coach and stuff. So it's a really big deal in our society. And it's like, and it's like I don't see politics as that much difference. It's like who was like identity politics? That's kind of like something that who was talking about Secker? Tom Secker. You ever listen to him, like Tom Secker?
Yeah.
He kind of emphasized that a lot, and he was doing his analysis, and I said, that is true. That is like really being kind of really really focused in on now. It seems like the kind of conception of this identity politics, where it's like you have all these people that simply because Hillary Clinton's a woman.
Yes, right.
It's
polarizing,
like,
right?
Yeah, and then of course it's a big that's a big component of all this, and that. Yeah, so when you kind of step away and look at it, and it's like that's all that really to the majority, I think that is what is really sort of animating those people, like the identity politics, and then what she represents symbolically and what he represents symbolically.
Yes, he represents the patriarchal white guy, misogynist, capitalist. And then she represents the complete opposite, polar opposite, the liberal, pro-woman, feminist, socialist.
Yeah. And, we brought that up before, too, how it's like these custom-crafted sort of villains for the other side, like Bush was, like the oil man, talks with the fake Texas accent, and he, it's great for the left to hate. He's perfect.
I use the Googles, maps, a lot of maps in the Googles, the internets.
I didn't know you did George Bush, man. That's really good.
Yeah, have you heard that clip? That's one of the funniest ones. Have you heard that one?
Where he's talking about the internets?
Yeah.
I just posted up something about him, and there's a link to a clip when he was attending university or something. He's like young Bush. And he's totally doesn't have an accent, and he's totally talking like an Eastern Seaboarder, and he's like totally articulate, doesn't stumble over his words. He's like really sharp sounding.
I remember Alex used to talk about that. He would say, "Folks, they're not real Texans." Okay, I've seen them. They came down here and they started wearing hats. Folks, they pretend to be from Texas. It's not real, folks. They're from New England.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, he allegedly went to college or was raised in Midland, Texas, or whatever. But of course, they're going to be going back and forth between. And then, like, why doesn't his brother have an accent? I mean, come on. But it's like, I know. It's just, but what was he talking? Okay.
Well, I think he was talking about. He was talking about W. Senior. Because W. Senior was, if I recall, he was from East Coast and then got into the oil business. So then he would have to come to Texas for that. And then he says they took on the persona of being, these Texan ranchers and good old Americans, but they're totally Eastern establishment, Anglophiles, as Quigley calls them.
Yeah, the Anglo-American establishment. Yeah, and I think that Bush or Baby Bush or whatever you want to call him went through probably extensive coaching, voice coaching and stuff because his accent is actually really good. Mm-hmm. But you saw it in that video I posted with him and that comedian impersonator.
Yeah.
And then Bush kind of like really emphasizes his whole shtick there to where it's obvious.
Well, and W. Senior doesn't really talk that way. He doesn't have that Southern accent. So I guess like you said that Junior is supposed to be raised in Texas or whatever. But anyway, I'm gonna have to go. I got a prior commitment, but it's been a good talk.
Oh, great, man! Yeah, appreciate having you on again, and that was real good.
Yeah,
good conversation.
Cool.
Enjoy it,
all right,
as always.
Have a good night. It was good to hang out and have a couple of beers too.
Yeah, that was great, man. Enjoyed it, Memphis. Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, hopefully we'll be able to do that again sometime.
All right, man. Have a good night.
All right, you too.